All right. Welcome back to the PricePlow Podcast. Today we are joined by Jonathan Scheiman, co-founder and CEO of Fitbiomics. This discussion is one that I've looked forward to for months. We've been really, really excited about this. If you have heard us talk about probiotics or functional probiotics, or maybe even endurance the last couple of months, a lot of it has been driven by some really fun behind-the-scenes conversations that I'm really hoping to bring to the public today. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. Let's jump in. Can we talk about where you came from, how you got to Fitbiomics, and why you're so passionate about probiotics?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Amazing to be here. Look, I've been looking forward to this conversation as well. But yeah, as mentioned, co-founder, CEO. Actually, my background, I was a former athlete. I played Division I basketball at St. John's. As the saying always goes, I wasn't good enough to make the NBA. So as a backup, I got a PhD in biomedicine. So I became a scientist because I had no other choices. But I think those two sort of areas of interest and backgrounds has really been influential in building something like Fitbiomics. I did my postdoc at Harvard, really in biotechnology and metagenomic research. And there we had this crazy idea of, hey, let's translate the microbiome of elite athletes into these next generation probiotics that could make everyone healthier. And that's kind of like the background for what we're doing.
I'm so excited to get into this, and I'm glad you started with that because my intro, anytime I've talked about v-nella or Fitbiomics, has been that exact story. These crazy scientists cultured the guts of high-level athletes. They found a specific strain that seems to help with endurance, but it also seems to do all these other wonderful things for your lifestyle. I've said this in videos. I want to put it up at the beginning here. While this is a podcast and we have some business dealings, I went out of my way before I knew you, Jonathan, to purchase both of your products on a subscription, used them myself, and ended up calling Mike and was like, no, we have to work with these guys. Like, this is really cool. I had outside people notice my endurance improve based on your strains. So if for anyone who has watched any content and heard that story, I'd really like to get in on like how you thought this up, how that story went. Mike, unless you have any other places to go, like I think like that story is the crux of what starts this conversation.
Nope. Yeah, let's do it. I like to start from the beginning, like where the idea kind of came from, obviously, and then how you got here. Because this clearly, looking at some of your background, this wasn't easy. So this might be an interesting one. So yeah, just let it rip, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I think for my particular background, I grew up in Greenwich Village, New York. I went to a performing arts high school. I was a collegiate athlete, and then I became sort of like a molecular biologist and dabbling in biotechnology. But that's all to say that I've been very influenced and inspired by this notion of bridging pop culture with cutting edge technology. Along those lines, it kind of takes this notion of be like Mike to an extreme, if you will, right? And when I was at Harvard and I was working on a lot of cool technologies, actually, one day I had a light bulb moment. I was like, what if we sequenced LeBron James's genome, right? Literally the most fit person in the world, the best athlete in the world, dare I say the GOAT of basketball, although I guess that's a very contentious topic. But what if we understand his biology? What if we understood it? And what are the ramifications if we could actually translate that into health solutions, not just for athletes, but the broader population? So it was a crazy idea, but the more and more we started doing research on various types of elite athletes, ultramarathon runners, Olympic caliber rowers, wrestlers, football players, soccer players, we kept discovering that actually there are very unique sort of microbial signatures in their bodies that are driving these very unique physiological processes like endurance, strength, mental toughness, recovery. And we were able to isolate those components, right? And then do all sorts of really cool clinical validation studies, translate them into these consumer products that now people are taking and helping them with everything like fighting fatigue, exercising more, sleeping better, things of that nature. So, again, the origin story is just like being a former athlete that got into science, that wanted to create things to make the world a healthier place. And I think it's just kind of like that simple, if you will.
So when you're coming up with some of these ideas, you're actually thinking about the general population, though, because like our minds, of course, on this podcast, everyone knows we're going towards performance first, and that's usually where the leading edge of like we're the tip of the spear in this industry. So like I haven't thought any further past performance, but you're thinking bigger, it seems like.
Well, I think performance. Listen, this is these notions of fitness, health, performance, longevity, biohacking. I mean, honestly, they're very similar things, right? I think whether, people want to be able to go to the gym to lift more weights or be able to run longer, I think at the end of the day, a majority of people desire those sort of outcomes so they could be the best version of themselves, right? That they could be healthier, they could be more fit, they could be stronger, right? And I think what we're seeing is, especially in today's society with chronic disease epidemic, issues with food, fatigue, insomnia, performance is a health thing, right? Performance is a longevity thing. And I do think that it's something that broader society is interested in optimizing.
Gotcha. Okay, so what were the steps taken to get from these initial ideas to having an actual product out? You almost making it sound too little too easy here.
Well, that's the whole secret sauce, if you will, right? It's like making this whole process as easy as taking a probiotic supplement. You don't have to worry about all the hardcore biotechnology and bioinformatics and culturomics and all that. We've taken care of that over years of translational research. But I think, listen, there's a lot that goes into it. First and foremost, it's recruiting some of the most fit people in the world, these elite performers. It's collecting biological samples from them, longitudinally from performance to recovery phases. It's then using, fairly sophisticated next generation sequencing and analytics components. And the amazing thing is, if you think about the microbiome, this ecosystem of like trillions of microorganisms in our gut, it's fairly dynamic in nature. Right, and it's highly modulated by what we eat, physical activity, geography. So actually, if you look at these elite performers and study their microbiomes over time, you could basically identify these bacteria that are uniquely enriched in their gut, that are doing things that drive performance and recovery. And once we identify those from a scientific perspective, now we could isolate them and do a whole bunch of translational research. So a lot of recruiting, a lot of convincing of athletes to give us their shit, and then using science to decode that and translate that into probiotics.
Is there ever a point where you're like, there's a chicken and egg situation where it's like, are these athletes better athletes because they already have this, or do they have this because they're performing at such a high level? Like, how do you parse that out?
I'm just such a huge believer in form fits function, everything from architecture to biology to health. Listen, everything is kind of competition and natural selection. And I just want to say that contrast, where we are in society, high fat, salt, sugar, antibiotic usage, sedentary lifestyles, majority of the population is depleting their microbiomes, right? Now think about these elite performers. We were talking about VNella, this bacteria that eats lactic acid to fight fatigue. We discovered that in ultramarathon runners that run 100 miles at a time, right? This super elite rare phenotype, the 0.01% of the population. And what we discovered is because they're producing way more amounts of lactic acid because they're running, that in turn is now a food source for VNella in their gut, enabling it to grow, to thrive. And now it's like this very synergistic host microbe benefit. So I think a lot of it is selection. And I think because these athletes are super, super active, they're now selecting for beneficial microbes that cater to their unique physiology.
Awesome. Okay, so from my perspective here, I think that we'd love to hear about your probiotic strain and your products. I almost think getting us a primer on the lactic acid story first is most important because it seems to be heavily misunderstood, or no one's ever come on this podcast and really just nailed the lactic acid explanation. Can you be that man?
I listen, we could nail microbiomes, performance, poop, lactic acid. We could do it all.
Let's do it.
So I think this is also what's really cool. You're right. Lactic acid, there's a huge misconception of it. A lot of people think it causes fatigue. It actually doesn't. Lactic acid is really a normal sort of like energy source in our body. There's a basal level of lactic acid always circulating in our blood. It goes to our brain, it goes to our muscles. It's actually produced by mitochondria, and it's produced during times of like strenuous physical activity and exercise as an energy source. It accumulates in the blood when it's being produced faster than our body could utilize it. This is associated with lactic threshold and when we fatigue and this and that. It then traditionally goes into the liver where it's converted into glucose. But what we found is actually this really novel physiological process where actually some of that lactic acid buildup in the blood goes into our gut, where it can now serve as a carbon source for microbes like VNella that eat it and now convert it into beneficial metabolites like short-chain fatty acids, which in turn go back into our muscles to power mitochondria and energy and endurance and combat fatigue. So it's this very interesting kind of like feedback loop. But lactic acid is serving as a beneficial food source for VNella that's now driving human performance.
All right, cool. And then, did you want to give your version of the primer on the gut microbiome while we're on it?
Yeah,
and poop.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think everyone kind of is familiar with the microbiome these days. It's sort of in vogue. Honestly, the notion of microbiomes is only like a little bit over a decade old when it's become popularized. But here's the reality. We're as much bacteria as we are human, right? We have trillions of microbes in and on our body, predominantly in our gut. I think you guys have probably heard the anecdotes. We have 100 times more microbial genes in our body than we do human genes, right? And this ecosystem is really just fundamentally impacting everything in our lives, right? From energy metabolism, protein metabolism, neurology, immunology, right? So think about the implications of optimizing that microbial ecosystem, right? And tying it back to elite athletes, I mentioned all these kind of fancy physiological terms, but for athletes, that's just endurance, strength, mental toughness, recovery. So what we could do now is understand the microbiome in these elite athletes that drive those processes and then turn those into these probiotics that everyone could benefit from.
Can I ask, so, I've heard, one thing I've heard is we know more about space than we do our own gut microbiome because it's just that vast and, overarching and deep. As someone who, works in that category of probiotics specifically, but overall gut microbiome, like, do you ever feel like you're like one small part of it? Like when you look at it from a certain perspective, are you looking at it mostly from endurance athletes? Like where do you start this? Because when we've talked about probiotics overall, you've talked about other benefits, but it just seems like you can get lost in the conversation of gut microbiomes.
Yeah, I think this is also the power of technology and where we are. And, I just want to say something too, like think about traditional biotech. 10 years, billions of dollars to develop drugs, less than 10% success rate. Now contrast that with health and society, human performance needs, supplements. Now imagine applying the power of biotechnology to create novel supplements or consumer health products. And you're right, it's overwhelming how vast the microbiome is. But I think that's kind of the trick, looking for microbes that are associated with specific physical attributes, right? I think if you look at the microbiome in the general population, there's so much noise. What do you know? What microbe is associated with what? But again, looking at ultramarathon runners with elite endurance, right? And then identifying microbes that play a role in lactic acid metabolism. That is such a very specific attribute, right? Then it expands, right? Think about strength athletes and looking at microbes that drive protein metabolism, right? Think about athletes that recover super fast and identifying microbes that reduce inflammation. So I think the trick is really linking the phenotype with the microbes you're looking for. And we've been able to do that, and there's a lot more of that to come.
Sorry, I was muted. That is fascinating. Like the idea of finding phenotypes and working backwards, like you find a condition or a quality in certain athletes or whatever type of human you're looking for. I think you've kind of mentioned that like athletes isn't the only thing you're interested in, but I think it's probably one of the more maybe exciting things to study. I'm very curious to get further on that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of ways this can go because you're talking about some bigger picture stuff that you don't have yet. And then we do have the stuff that you do have. So like we could almost turn this into a whole business conversation, which maybe we could do at the end. But I want to, of course, for now, I want to stick on like the product, the ingredient, but then like the future ramifications of this type of thinking, this type of technology is obviously there's more than just endurance athletes out there. So lots of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to actually geek out a second. We were talking offline about Comic-Con and stuff like that. And, I'm a total Comic-Con pop arts geek. But I love this notion of like reverse engineering superheroes. And just to really geek out, like if you literally Google and Wikipedia Captain America, right? Taking sort of like this superhero serum. If you go on Wikipedia, it says it basically gave Captain America the powers of like the greatest Olympic endurance athlete, because now this serum is rapidly removing toxins from his body. And if you click on toxins, lactic acid comes up. So I like to say that we've reverse engineered Captain America. And now we have it in a capsule called VNella that we could give to everyone to improve their health and performance.
I think I love that. I've always had some really funny thoughts in the whole, they call it the super soldier serum. And it's always been to me like, they clearly gave him steroids, but they're trying to make that super soldier, right? And and I think it's so interesting. I love that thought process because I that is super exciting to a lot of people, like the idea of human optimization. And so the fact that you're inspired by that for what you're creating is that I'm super on the same wavelength as you.
Yeah. It's the ultimate, microbiomes are the ultimate biohack. We're literally identifying, isolating biological components of these super performers and now translating that into a supplement for everyone, right? It's just, again, it's not science fiction. It's science fact at this point, right? And that's sort of what we're building.
Yeah. It's funny. We opened it up and I kind of mentioned that I purchased your product. One of the reasons I went out and like literally purchased it was because the things that I had heard seemed unlikely. Like it really does. Like when you hear people, like when people hear me talk about like what it did to my level of endurance, I'm sure it sounds unlikely just with the power of natural supplements, right? Like I understand because I was there and I needed to see it for myself. It's a very exciting opportunity, and I'm excited to see where it goes. But I agree with Mike. I think for the purpose of this, I'd love to stick on the topic of athletic performance. I don't know where you guys wanted to go with it, but I speak a lot on the endurance side of it. But there is so much more to v-nella and nella, also in sleep and vigilance and other factors. Like what's really cool about it is that I know that you guys identified high level endurance athletes. And that was kind of like the metric that you worked backwards from. But when fixing that, I find that so many different systems in the body also optimize. I get better sleep. I mean, obviously my digestion is better because it's a probiotic. But there are so many other pathways that I assume that you guys are going to be following down to see the benefits of.
Yeah. So in my opinion, let's just get the walkthrough on the studies and v-nella and the strain, like just give us the whole presentation / elevator pitch. The one thing I want to comment on is that we haven't talked about probiotics that much on this channel. There's lots of good research and there's lots of like statistically significant changes that can be made, pretty cool endpoints out there. But in terms of like for our interest, what is clinically significant, like what can actually be seen out in the field and everything from like our perspectives, your ingredient is like the one for this channel. This is the one that is being noticed by people. And that's where we're like, okay, we need to know what Jonathan's doing over there. So that's kind of my thinking for this, but let's just get the full presentation on kind of like, what v-nella is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I also think what's interesting too is, to your point, lactic acid metabolism and how we identified it from ultramarathon runners. And we'll get to this, but just somewhat of a segue, how it's relevant for things like muscle building and protein metabolism and strength training. And we've actually had fitness instructors immediately identify that. And it's something that you guys covered just amazingly well in that whole sort of biochemistry process, right? And how mitochondria and muscles are sort of like really impacted by lactic acid or short chain fatty acids, right? So yeah, I was just at Harvard and, we created this kind of like sports genomics research project, which again, this notion of looking at the microbiome of these elite athletes back in 2015. Wow, hard to believe at this point. I literally went around Boston for 2 weeks straight, riding in a zip car, 8 hours a day, collecting poop from athletes, before and after the marathon. And like they called it the magic stool bus and everything like that, right? And I would literally be on call for athletes and like, hey, man, are you ready to come to my apartment and pick up the sample? I was like, sounds good. But we sort of looked at all these microbiome samples. We identified VNella that spikes immediately in abundance right after strenuous exercise. We looked at its metabolic pathways and how it converts lactate to acetate propionate. And then we published a preclinical study where we fed animals VNella, and we saw that they actually improved their endurance, run till exhaustion, by over 13% compared to normal placebo-controlled or lactobacillus probiotics. Since then, work has continued at Harvard to show that it's actually improving run till exhaustion in animals like twofold compared to generic probiotics. We spun out of Harvard, we created the company, and then we immediately wanted to turn this lab scale discovery into this industrially scaled commercial grade product. We then ran a pilot clinical study looking at VO2 max. So again, another form of run till exhaustion. We had participants consume VNella on a daily basis for only 2 weeks. And what we found was that VNella compared to placebo, improved exercise performance, VO2 max, but really what it did was it prevented performance decline compared to sort of like the control. So again, how VNella lactic acid metabolism as a probiotic is improving endurance, but also reducing fatigue. And that study is published in iScience. The preclinical study was published in Nature Medicine. And again, that's when we really went from this very provocative discovery to like, wow, we have a clinically validated consumer product that people could benefit from. I'll kind of pause there. There's more. There's some unpublished data that we're going to get ready to bring to the world. But to your point, we rapidly went from microbiome data to a probiotic that's clinically validated. So it's very exciting with what we've been able to achieve.
Now, is this strain not found at all in unhealthier people or or just in scant amounts? Have you looked into any of that?
Yeah. So VNella, it is, kind of present. You always have microbes that are present, but it's at much lower abundance levels in, let's say, sedentary populations. And the other trick, too, is with physical endurance and activity, it spikes in abundance with these sort of elite athletes. Because, again, form fits function, there's an influx of lactic acid, and now they have the right microbe there to take advantage of it. So it's increased and continues to increase in these elite athletes.
Would you say it's increasing throughout like the weeks and months of training hard, or it's increasing like acutely? The body starts pumping stuff out like the minute I start swimming a crazy hard mile or something.
It's really acute, right? And we're talking about there's so much cool data. First and foremost, typically you have around 2 nanomolar of lactic acid at baseline in your blood, in your body. It rapidly increases with intense exercise. It spikes up to something like 8 to 10 nanomolar, right? What we've seen is, within the matter of hours, right, VNella abundance spikes accordingly, right? Because when you have this rapid influx of like food, VNella's like, oh my God, I'm hungry. Let me just eat it up, right? And now it's able to replicate and sort of thrive in this sort of lactate-rich environment. So another thing to geek out on, we've actually done studies where you see VNella abundance levels oscillate over the course of a week between intense and sort of like low intensity exercise. So you could actually track, hey, an athlete is working out really hard, VNella levels spike. Not so hard, VNellas are kind of moderate. A day off, VNellas levels are very low. So VNella changes very, very acutely with intense exercise.
Interesting. So what is actually creating the VNella, and where is it going when it goes down? Are you pooping it back out, or does it get like reabsorbed in the bloodstream? Or what?
Yeah, everything, again, natural selection and competition. And it's one of these things where if a food source is abundant, then the microbes that could eat it will thrive and continue to multiply. And if that food source isn't abundant, then other microbes will sort of grow and replace it and thrive and stuff like that. And you're right, there is sort of continuous sort of recycling and stuff like that with normal GI transit and things of that nature. But that's also, this is a really cool concept. Diet heavily impacts our microbiome composition, right? So you could eat a lot of fibers, you could eat a lot of fat or sugar. Lactic acid is the food for VNella, right? It is the fiber, it is the prebiotic for VNella, right? So when you have more of it, VNella will thrive.
Okay, great. Ben, I don't know if you have any questions, but one thing, so I want to start talking about practical use applications in terms of you mentioned that it actually reduces the decline. So what if someone's already a supreme elite athlete and they don't have as much, performance decline as a regular person like myself? Are they a worse candidate to use it? Who's the best candidates and who's not going to get as much benefit out of it?
Yeah, Ben, I think you had mentioned this too, just from sort of your observations in your community of people that are using it. First thing to say is we literally have a wide range of people that are benefiting from VNella. We're talking about, we have Olympic athletes, world champions, professional athletes using it, right? And just it's continuing to optimize not just performance, but recovery, right? You can imagine if you're optimizing lactic acid metabolism, muscle health, right? Enables you to stay more active and kind of get back faster. But we also have, everyday health seekers, right? We have middle-aged men, we have perimenopausal women that are more interested in strength training and their longevity. I think, Ben, you said something interesting, right? You said in your community, for people that are already into fitness, they say this helps me with my exercise and do more. Whereas for people that aren't as active, it's this just helps me with my lifestyle. I'm just less tired, right? I don't have to take a nap in the middle of the day, or I don't need coffee in the afternoon. I just have more natural energy. So it's really providing universal benefits to a broad range of users.
Something you said early on was, like you were talking about the difference between health and performance, and I consider to be your base of health of your body is going to be what gives you the platform to then perform at a better level. It's very hard to be a high level athlete with an unhealthy body. And so I find that a lot of people, even if you're not an athlete looking to change your mile time or something like that, improving your health improves your quality of life, or the way that you interface with stress around you, or whatever it is that your lifestyle is. It's kind of I think overdone, but if you consider that lifestyle to be your sport, you can perform better, whether that's your job or how you deal with stress with your family or something. People have reported a lot of different benefits across that. One thing that I thought was kind of interesting, kind of similar to what Mike was asking, I wanted to ask in a different way, was you were kind of mentioning if lactic acid is the food for VNella, is there any merit to taking different doses of VNella based on how much volume of training you're doing, or if you're feeding it lactic acid, is there any equation to that where you're all right, well, if I'm training more frequently than now, I should take more VNella to feed on more of that lactic acid? Or when you're taking VNella, should you focus your training on higher lower rest times, higher volume? Have you guys seen anything in terms of how that equation changes with different amounts of training and different amounts of VNella?
Yeah, we have, so this segues to the next clinical study we did, and I think it's a perfect, marriage between performance, right, athletics and fitness versus just lifestyle. I mentioned the clinical studies we did, one with animals, run to exhaustion, one with humans, VO2 max. Not published yet, but something we completed is we did a larger clinical trial just looking at fatigue in the general population, right? And how much fatigue interferes with daily lives, how much energy people have, how much people are able to exercise on their own without being forced. And I can just say things like VNella reduced general fatigue by 30%. It reduced how tired people were by 50%, right? It reduced the number of days fatigue interferes with daily lives by 1 to 2 days per week, right? So again, these weren't athletes and stuff like that. But to your point, it's still part of performance, right? Because if fatigue isn't interfering, now we have more energy to do things and perform at an optimal level. That's a long-winded way of saying is we did do dose curves with VNella, right? We did a high dose, we did a low dose, and actually, even at lower dosages, we're seeing that's efficacious and its benefits in terms of reducing fatigue and things of that. So We haven't, I guess, reached the performance threshold yet in which VNella is not working, right? It's still something that we're looking into, and maybe for different applications, like let's just say chronic fatigue or stuff like that, maybe a higher dosage is needed. But thus far, even at, what we have now, 10 billion CFUs on pack, that's able to provide benefit across the board for fatigue and performance. So it's very, what's the word I say? It's very impactful.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of broad benefits for general health. Then I'm interested in some of the sleep stuff too. But let's say a lot of people listening to this, they have something big coming up. My big race every year, 2-mile open water, is like September 15th of every year. How would you? And let's say I don't have an unlimited budget. Let's say I'm willing to. How would you start? How would you start dosing it, and like what would you do to make it to September 15th as good as possible?
Yeah. So one, I mean, I think obviously integrating it into your, fitness routine or your training schedule, sooner than later is best. Just to be real with you, again, Ben, I think you could, attest to this. In our clinical data and our consumer data, we're seeing people are noticing benefits within as little as like 10 days of daily usage, right? That is rapid. Like, I just want to put that into context. Most people take supplements as like a form of insurance, right? It's like, I don't know if it's working, but I'm going to take it because I think it's going to do something good. What really makes our products unique is like not only the sophisticated biotechnology and IP, but how rapidly consumers notice benefits. So for instance, there is a case where you're like, oh shit, I'm a week out from my race. What do I do? You could start taking VNella, and in a week, it's going to work. I mean, I would recommend starting maybe a month before, right?
Okay.
And then the other cool thing is what we've seen with clinical data is it's fine tunable. Like once you stop using it, you kind of go back to the baseline within a week. So it's something you could turn on and off, although candidly, I think people are just going to want optimal performance all the time. So I think it's something that is easy to integrate into daily lifestyles.
I used VNella into a jiu-jitsu tournament. I actually have a little bit of, I like from an anecdotal standpoint, I felt the differences. I would say 10 days is probably a good place to put it. I would say like at 9 to 10 days was when I was looking around like, all right, like, is something going to change? And like, I remember literally telling Mike, like, I don't know if anything's happening. And then like 2 days later, I texted him. I was like, it happened. Like, I know, I can see it. But the cool thing about that isn't just like, all right, going from off to on, but then when you apply that on time to a training block, because the training that you do is that stimulus that you'll then recover from and improve on. So if you can like now do that training block with VNella, you can push that much more, recover that much more, and improve that much more. That's how I use it. I used it for a 4-week block into my competition. And I mean, the difference was like, it was incredibly differentiated from what I would have experienced otherwise.
I love that, right? It's not about off and on, but you're getting exponential results because now it adds up over time where you're continuing to have better output, better performance, and that's just sort of like extrapolated to everything you're doing. I just want to say also...
I think this applies... Sorry.
Oh, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I think this applies to a lot of supplements and like the way that we study them. Like, as a provider of ingredients, you may not want to fund a 12-week study, but a lot of the times the things that like you see in the acute, then if you apply that to the way that the training stimulus is recovered from, those adaptations over time will have possibly a different turnout than what you even see acutely, because you can then apply that to heavier, harder training.
Yeah. I just want to say, too, it is so amazing, right, from a scientific perspective, how reproducible the consumer data and clinical data is, right? That's also the joke in science, too. How reproducible is any of this stuff? So let me just say, first of all, from looking at VNella abundance levels in athletes, right, we're seeing it almost this universal phenomenon in various types of athletes. But even from the benefits, it's something I've experienced, right? Like within that 10-day window, it's like, okay, something is working here and I could feel it. And I want to share, I could share with you offline this text message exchange between like another middle-aged man, I'll be 43 next month. And it's funny, I think there's a lot of men in general that are both passive with their health, yet very skeptical of new health interventions or performance interventions. And like, there's this text exchange like, okay, I'm trying it day one, and then literally a week later, it was like, holy shit, is this thing for real? And it's just like a bunch of GIFs and like emojis that transpired. But, it's like clockwork, 7 to 10 days. People are like, wow, this is amazing.
So I have to ask, you've mentioned a few times that you have unpublished stuff, but you've kind of hinted at it. Are you comfortable giving us some of that information? Like, I wasn't sure if you were saying that to say that we're going to be talking about it, but following the story of the data, like what comes next from where we're at.
Yeah, don't get yourself in trouble with the journals, though.
Yeah.
Well,
but tell us everything.
Well, so exactly. I think I think we're just starting to really uncover the true potential of something like VNella. The only thing I could really, and again, I don't want to just. The only thing I could really compare VNella to is something maybe like a GLP-1. And I say that because you might be like, John, what are you talking about? Like, this is crazy. If you think about how GLP-1 was developed for diabetes and obesity, and now you're seeing like almost these just like wonder drug benefits and everything from cardiovascular health, right? Addiction, all these other things. And I think that's the power of just reducing fat in general. But with like VNella, mechanistically, we spoke about lactic acid metabolism, short chain fatty acids, mitochondria. We're seeing immunological benefits, right? Reduction in inflammation and stuff like that. Think about that from a recovery standpoint. This is really like bleeding edge type stuff. We're also seeing some interesting like gut-brain interactions and how, again, this isn't published yet, but we've done studies in the past on like run till exhaustion and VO2 max and like forced exercise, right? For endurance. We're actually seeing how VNL is just almost motivating people to be more active, right? On their own without forcing them. So I think, we're uncovering all these amazing benefits, and it's going to now to be applied to so many different things moving forward. So it's really, really exciting what we're uncovering.
Let's say it did have that you were able to verifiably show that it was making a statistically significant increase in motivation to exercise. Could you speculate what the mechanism even is with that?
Yeah. And let me just say, pretty soon we will be able to show statistically significant that it's doing that, right? So, feel like I'm at Comic-Con teasing the next Marvel movie or something like that. But, again, I think if you think about the microbiome, and what do we know, right? It's involved in digestion. It's involved in activating 70% of our immune system. It's involved in creating neurotransmitters to optimize, brain function. That's what we're seeing. These short chain fatty acids have a role in these pleiotropic benefits in our bodies, right? And by the way, we haven't even spoken about Nella for sleep. I just want to say, here's a shout out. That manuscript will be published later this month, showing clinical validation in statistically significant manners for improving sleep. And we're seeing that it's doing that by optimizing the immune system, reducing oxidative stress and inflammation. So there's a lot of immune, a lot of neuro, and a lot of just metabolic benefits these microbes are doing.
And just to reiterate for anyone listening who doesn't know, Nella is your original probiotic strain that is different than the VNella that we're mostly talking about here. So you have two different products.
Absolutely. One is for sleep and better digestion. The other one is for fatigue and improved endurance.
Okay, awesome. So getting back to some of the strategies, I wrote down another question. You had mentioned fiber really quickly, and I guess my question is kind of like, what's the quote-unquote best diet to support VNella? Would it be... And we don't need to get into the diet wars specifically. Like a lot of people doing endurance-y stuff are going to obviously be carbing up and a lot of that. Some who are doing ultra endurance might be in the keto world or whatever in that world. But in general, like what do I want to feed VNella itself? Do you have like preferred
Yeah. I mean, again, I think, lactic acid is the food source and the prebiotic. So there are a few ways to look at this. I mean, obviously, if you're exercising, producing more lactic acid, there's a positive feedback loop, and VNella will now eat it up and sort of like do its thing. I will also say this, lactic acid is normally produced in the gut as well. There's an interesting synergy between lactobacillus probiotics and VNella. As you might know, lactobacillus bacteria produce lactic acid. So a lot of people take Nella, which is like a lactobacillus, in conjunction with VNella, which now eats the lactic acid. So that's what we'd say. There's also some cool things we're looking into, and like how certain fruit extracts might optimize VNella. And then the other cool thing is if you think about electrolytes, right? And things like sodium lactate is an electrolyte. So it could help with hydration, but then also feed VNella and stuff like that. So these are some of the things we're building out downstream.
Interesting. Okay, so a question I have to ask is, why not just take short chain fatty acids themselves and skip the VNella?
Yeah, I think there's, one, again, VNella is doing a lot of things as a microorganism and a probiotic with the immune system and producing other metabolites. Also, it's a matter of half-life, right? I think it's harder to get a short-chain fatty acid as a small molecule into the gut. The other thing, too, is while, VNella, a lot of it is in sort of like the large intestine, it also is functional in the small intestine as well. So again, it's a little hard to deliver something like an acetate or propionate directly to the GI and have it be functional. So I think you'd be missing out on a lot of benefits of VNella, and you might not have the feasibility with just taking, a probiotic.
Mm-hmm. And simple question: are you taking it with food, empty stomach? What would you say is preferred?
Yeah, we recommend for both Nella and VNella taken in the morning, glass of water, maybe 30 minutes before breakfast.
Perfect.
Yep.
And since things spike, would it seem that it would make sense would split dosing ever make sense if you're doing 2 days or anything like that? Or like if you have, would 2 workouts a day help because you're respiking your lactic acid? Or alternatively, you see where I'm going? Like, or would taking it twice a day work better just to space it out every 12 hours, anything like that?
I mean, listen, now you're talking about like really cool biohacking concepts and stuff like that, and fine tuning, various biological components. I think this goes back to the question about dosage and at what point is it beneficial. Right now, again, we recommend 1 capsule a day, 10 billion CFUs, and that seems to do the trick within 7 to 10 days. However, we do, have users that are doubling up or, that want to like take it sort of to even have a faster, more acute response. And it could also be something interesting, maybe after running a marathon, maybe you take a higher dosage to help accelerate recovery. Those are all things we have the data on 1 a day, 10 billion CFUs. The rest of the information is more sort of like anecdotal, and I think people are doing what's optimal for their particular bodies.
Right. Don't let me overcomplicate things, though.
Yeah. No,
but
you bring up a great point, right? Like, there's so many ways we could potentially fine-tune the dosage for various applications.
Excellent.
That's such an interesting way to think about it. I guess you need to know, like, how does the concentration of VNella in the gut increase and decrease? Like, what is the proverbial half-life, right? To find out what the dosing schedule should be.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, I might have shared this information with you, but like literally the first graph where we discovered VNella, and I mentioned this longitudinal assessment pre and post marathon, right? Now, again, I think resolution is limited to how many times you could collect a biological sample, right? But what we saw is like literally the day after the marathon, there was this spike in VNella. And then by 2 to 3 days after the marathon, it kind of went back to baseline. So literally it was like almost this heartbeat. So, that's why continued usage is beneficial because it will sort of naturally go down. And also really cool is you might imagine, we've already said, the intensity of exercise determines how large that spike is. So again, it would make sense the intensity of exercise might determine the dosage you want to take to sort of like meet those demands.
Okay, yeah, I could reach in those lines. And I actually had some questions written down about the athletes. Like, you don't have to answer all these questions, but how much do you have to pay an athlete to come and like put his poop in a cup or whatever they have to do? What is the process like?
You know, I think athletes, they're a self-selecting community. I think first and foremost, they are they care mostly about their bodies, their biology, right, and how they could continue to optimize it to perform as best as they can. So I think, listen, whenever you come in and you talk about, hey, listen, we have this novel technology that looks at your microbiome and how that's going to impact your performance and recovery, I think, that's like, that opens the doors, right? Now, we have compensated our athletes. We've done that actually by giving them shares of the company. And we felt...
Really?
Yeah, well, we felt very adamant about this because think about it, right? We're literally translating their biological data into consumer health products, right? And we wanted to be very proactive in this, right? If they're going to help us create these generational health solutions, then they should benefit from that, right? We've learned from their biology to now create these commercial products, and they should benefit both from a human performance and a commercial compensation perspective. So we partner with our athletes, right? We give them their data back for free. We give them some options. We give them free products, and we involve them in the whole innovation pipeline. Like also, in many ways, they're our first users, right? Like our first product, Nella, before it was really launched, we had athletes using it at the Tokyo Olympics and medaling with it, right? And the same thing with VNella. Before we brought it to the world, we did this whole like sort of study and early access user, and a lot of the athletes were taking it, right? And it's like, this is the feedback, this is how it's affecting us, this is the benefits. So we partner with athletes from every aspect of the company.
That's awesome. I love that you bring that up because like when you tell the story about how you like took cultures of athletes and then that becomes a product, there is like a sense of like their biological like IP almost, and that's so cool that you rewarded them in that way because it sounds controversial and crazy to use these people ahead of time and take their data and then make that into a supplement. It's super cool that you kept them around in that fashion because that's. Really,
I was not expecting that answer, and I absolutely love it. Like it's clearly the best solution. Like yeah, you can give them $200 or whatever it is. I don't even know, but that makes so much more sense because if their stuff works, the company works. And they can have some some benefits on the back end. Yeah. How cool is that? I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, I don't know if you guys saw the movie, what was it? The one on Nike and Michael Jordan and stuff like that. I forgot what it was called. Air, right? And just think about how radical that concept was, right? Where you had this sort of generational athlete that clearly is going to, propel the company, and they gave them royalties, right? And that was a very transformative partnership that included Jordan in this whole process, right? And again, I want to go back to, it takes Be Like Mike to a new level, right? Partnering with these athletes, decoding their biological data to create these next generation health solutions, right? That society could benefit from, but also that they're involved with as we continue to grow and they get compensated in numerous manners, right? And that's, to your point, we didn't have to do that, but we knew it was the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Amazing. And so I guess my other question was did they have any concerns that you're going to clone them with your crazy technology and make super athlete babies or something? But it almost seems like you've kind of alleviated some of those concerns by making them part of the show.
Yeah. No, I think that's what people want. And you even see this too now where I think athletes are becoming more business savvy. They're getting involved with companies at the ground floor. They don't just want a quick paycheck. They want, creative sort of insights. They want equity, right? And that's what we want too. I think there's this really, again, this cool notion of how we could bridge pop culture and athletics with cutting edge technology, really to create something both transformative but tangible for society, right? And again, we need the athletes for our innovation, but we also need them for advocacy, right? That this is why I'm using it, and this is why I think this is going to help you as well. So it's just, I was a former athlete, I became a scientist, now an entrepreneur, so this is also part of my evolution as well, right? And creating these disruptive business models where we could translate cool innovations into these consumer products.
Absolutely. And that brings me to where I wanted to go next is like the bigger picture. What other types of superhumans do you think you can get? Like, can this turn into a whole different business model? Are you interested in getting this ingredient or similar? Like, you only have so many, okay, you're a smart person. You only have so many hours in the day. Where are you taking this?
Well, I'm taking VNella everywhere I go, and that's enabling more hours in the day for me to be productive. But that's not the question you asked, right? But you gave me the opportunity, so I went there. But listen, I think there is no corner of human performance on longevity that we can't integrate into, right? Let me just make a bold statement, and it's, we want to be the NVIDIA of wellness, right? We're creating biological software, right, that we could sort of integrate into the $7 trillion wellness economy, right? We're creating these proprietary probiotics that no one else in the world has, that are derived from the most fit people in the world, that could address some of the most pressing health challenges in society, right? Fatigue is an epidemic. Think about it coming out of the pandemic. Think about perimenopause, metabolic health, GLP-1 users that need exercise as medicine, long COVID, chronic fatigue, anything you could think of, right? VNella could potentially address, right? And for us, the goal is not to be a D2C supplement company, right? We are building commercial partners globally, right? Where we could now distribute our finished products, Nella and VNella, but then also how our IP could integrate into food and beverage, as well. So now that's just VNella, right? I just want to say, you think of elite phenotypes and how diverse it is, right? Neurologically, sort of muscle, strength, endurance, whatever you could think of, like mental focus, clarity. We've already identified another 15 microbes in our platform. We're building out programs for mood, strength, recovery. And just think about continued expansion of this biological database, which manifests itself into probiotics and other sort of forms of health solutions as well. I truly think we're just scratching the surface, and things like Nella and VNella have paved the way for this.
Is there any possibility of this translating to non-physical things such as supremely smart people or anything like that, like the best chess players in the world? Do you think you'd find anything different in their guts?
Yeah. Right. Again, I want to take it back to our roots, right? And one of the first things I said is like, I'm a big believer in form fits function, right? Natural selection, competition. When you have these super rare, unique phenotypes, there's something that's driving that physiological process. Now, the challenge is, right, with all this noise, how do you identify the specific components? But again, as we spoke about, if you're matching the microbe to a specific physiological process, it facilitates our ability to rapidly discover, translate, and validate these next-gen microbes. So, again, we're a startup. I think the best thing we could do is get VNella out to the world, get everyone using it, right, and continue to grow that. And then that will lead to our ability to create new innovations in an accelerated timeline.
Excellent. And I will say, because I am doing so much like blood donation, my endurance is down. I decided not to take VNella because Cody asked me to send it to him, our videographer. He's got a bodybuilding competition coming up, and he's looking for some extra endurance. And so we're dragging out his run, and he's also having great effects. So I'm still haven't touched it, but I had to send it to Cody. His competition was most important at this moment. So we're going to probably put together a little bit of bonus content based on his effects as well. So we're definitely he was very excited to know that I was willing to send my precious boxes over to him.
Man, we gotta get you. So come on, man, you're behind the times. You're like the only one that hasn't used VNella. We got to get you some.
Yeah, I mean, just I don't like to ask for too much stuff until, like, at least until we get you on the podcast, and then now it's fair game. But because I know how much it costs. It's not the cheapest thing in the world. Coupon code PricePlow, of course, helps and everything. And so I don't know. Sometimes I feel like it's best to make sure that like the right people have it and that it's available and everything. But I will definitely be after the next donation. I think I'm going to be taking you up on that offer.
One last thing into your users, your audience. Think about something like VNella right now. If you do a monthly subscription, it's $65 a month. You're talking about a shade over $2 a day for literally the biggest innovation, I'm just going to say, in like human performance and endurance and things of that nature, right? I mean, that is crazy affordable. Compare that to thousands of dollars a month for GLP-1s, right? Compare that to all these other biotech innovations out there. So we are proud that not only did we create something truly disruptive and sort of like novel to human performance, we've made it extremely affordable and accessible to everyone, right? So the question is, why wouldn't you try something like VNella for when it costs less than coffee or something like that, right?
That's true. That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. So anyway, the proof is in the pudding.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. Well, yeah. Any other closing thoughts? Like we have kind of covered the small picture, the big picture, your background. Everyone, we always close the podcast off with where to find you and who to follow, what to do if people are interested in more from you.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to come back on to explain your future, research, or we'd love to cover that, of course, ourselves. But you're always going to be welcome back on if you have something like pretty crazy that you find. Like we're always down to discuss.
Yeah, I would love to come back. I think this has been so fun, and I think just geeking out with you guys and you guys sort of allowing me to geek out. But I guess some things I'll just say specifically to your demographic or users. I think probiotics traditionally have been over-indexed for women and are sort of associated with digestion. Let me just say, we are bringing a lot of men into the category, right? And I think because, there's this interesting demographic, millennial men, former athletes, maybe a little bit past their prime that maybe have lost something and are looking to gain it back, right? They're now focused on longevity and health and how VNella is helping them with that in their daily performance. I think something like VNella is perfect for your audience, and just thinking about muscle health and endurance. So I think it's a very, exciting to integrate into PricePlow, the community. I also think it's interesting in society. There's like this phenomenon called Huberman husbands, and how again, there's this interesting contrast. I think women traditionally are like the ultimate biohackers because the health industry has historically neglected them. I think men traditionally are maybe more passive with their health, but now they're waking up, right? And like, all right, no, I want to focus on my performance and my health. And I think VNella is really tapping into that mindset extremely well. So we're at fitbiomics.com. I think everyone should check out Nella and VNella. And I think just like you, Ben, they'll probably be, holy shit, I can't believe how good this is working, right? So I think that's what I would leave with.
I can't wait for more people to try it. We've just advocating for friends and people around our community, like our Discord, to try it out. But I really can't wait to get this content out there because I think that it does it a real service from the creator's mouth to hear where it comes from. So thanks for telling the story.
Amazing. Thanks for having me.